adventure, sports, outdoors. With host Harry Canterbury.
There I was, back in the wild again, and I felt right at home where I belong. I had that feeling coming over me again, just like it happened so many times before. Yeah.
Hi, Harry Canterbury with another edition of Adventure Sports Outdoors. Join us today as we take a look into the past in Peoria, Illinois. A murder committed on March the 10th of 1947. George P. McNear, the president and owner of the TP&W Railroad, was on his way home from a Bradley basketball game, and at the corner of High Street, Sheridan Road, and Moss, was assassinated. I'm joined today with Norm Kelly, and Norm is going to give us an insight on this mystery. So stay tuned today for a neat show.
Adventure Sports Outdoors is brought to you in part by Corsall Lumber, manufacturers of quality hardwood products, buyers of standing timber in Smithfield. Central Pool Supply, everything from pools to pool tables and much more in Peoria on West Pioneer Parkway. Kelleher's Irish Pub and Eatery, located on Peoria's riverfront, open 11 a.m. daily. Eastport Marina, one of the only marinas in its class between Chicago and St. Louis, on Mariners Way in East Peoria. Goodwill of Central Illinois, free employment and veteran and youth services made possible because you donate. Lori Feld of Allstate Insurance, conveniently located in Peoria, East Peoria, and Springfield. And by Statewide Fingerprinting, specializing in concealed carry and FOID cards, 400 North 8th Street in Pekin. Our thanks to all of these sponsors.
Hey, here we are again. A couple months ago we did the Bernie Shelton mystery. That's never been solved. They kind of know who did it, old Blackie, but he's gone now too, so it really doesn't matter anymore.
No.
But when I was a little kid, back about 1962 and 3, I was about 10 years old, and we would drive by on Moss Avenue, and my father always used to point at that house and say, that is where George McNear lived, and he was killed right down here.
That's right.
And you were around, you were a, you know,
Teener.
You were a teenager, or
Yes.
almost in your 20s, and
You know,
so you remember it distinctively. Give me an idea of
Absolutely.
what, that was a big deal, because today we have shootings in Peoria, they're just, everyday affairs now, it
Yes,
seems like.
that's right.
But when something like that happened back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, it was a big deal. And I'm sure it was a big deal when you were around.
absolutely. In 1946, we had our first so-called gangland-style murder. Changed the reputation of Peoria from a wide-open, lusty, bawdy town to a gangster town, which it never was. And then in 1947, when McNear was killed, it convinced everybody that maybe we are a gangster town, because this man was very wealthy, very well known. And even the mayor, after he said, I just can't understand how a prominent man like George McNear can be killed here in Peoria. He must not have listened to what I've listened to over the years. But he's rich. And when he's rich, and he was treated differently. And it was a shocking, a sensational murder.
I spoke with a guy yesterday who worked for the TP&W, Art Hunsaker. I think you know Art Hunsaker. And he told me that when he hired in 59, there was a lot of guys there. They all had, nicknames. There was Porky and Wooden Shoes, and they all had different nicknames, just like a lot of us do when we work in a place like that. And he said that there was never any mention of that, and when he would bring it up, of course, everybody kind of just went away. Do you think that that particular murder was caused by Union intervention into the the whole deal?
Well, if you're looking for motive, you would point at the union. There's only one problem. There's 333 members of that union. So when you say the union, you're not telling me anything. And how could they get together and somehow conspire and get the job done? I'm telling you, it was from somebody probably from St. Louis. Someone paid.
I think he was hired by someone.
Absolutely, it was an absolute
Professional
kill.
hit.
No doubt in my mind about that, because all that I know, a lot of people didn't like George McNear, and a lot of people were not connected in any way with the railroad business. But they just didn't like him. He was a big, rough guy. He treated his workers pretty badly, if you want to know the absolute truth.
Well, I was told that when they would go over to Gridley, and of course they would have to pull over on a siding to let another train go by, that he had orders when the engineers got off the train, they had to wait, 10 minutes for the train to pass, that they were to pull weeds and cut weeds along the railroad track. He did not want anyone idle. So he was always pushing.
George worked up at the crack of dawn, had allowed himself 1/2 hour for lunch, and worked well into the night. He expected everyone to work for him and just work forever. That's what he demanded.
Well, it's March the 10th. The snow is gone. Peoria's getting ready for spring, and the weather's in the 50s and 40s, and a lot of people are out walking. Tell us what happened, Norm, on March the 10th of 1947.
George McNear left his home up on Moss Avenue. He walked everywhere he went, almost. It was a foggy, somewhat cool day. He certainly had on an overcoat, and he always carried a cane. He walked all the way down to the Armory. That's where Bradley played their games. We were playing Colorado College, and of course he had a very good seat. And after the game was over, Bradley had won that game 66-65, and that made George happy. The truth is, the game was taken away from Bradley because they found that the timing clock was off. So George went to his death thinking that we'd won that game. And when he left the game,
he walked right up Main Street?
That's right. Walked over to Main Street. He ran into a guy named Cornelius O'Brien, who was just a friend of his, and I know this from the coroner's inquest. They just talked a little bit about the weather and what was going on. And also, Cornelius told him that the lights were out around George's house. That's when the first time he knew about that. Then when he turned left on High Street, he waved at the local guard. They had a man it was a West Bluff officer. And they talked a little bit, and then he walked up close to where he stopped right there at Sheridan and High Street, and of course High Street is behind him, and then he stopped right there because he must have heard a noise. He may have heard this man call to him, because when he got ready to step off, he stepped off the curb, but he turned totally to the right and looked towards the sound. And instantly there was an explosion, and that's when the shot was fired. And they say he threw his cane, but I don't think he did. I think when he got hit, Harry, by 6 slugs from a double-aught 12-gauge
They're the size of a
shotgun.
38 bullet. It's like getting hit with a 38 6 times.
Wow.
And there's 9 shot in a double-aught buck, so 3 of them went past him.
Although, Harry, you could have loaded your own, couldn't you? Because they never found any evidence of where they may have hit. But at any rate, down went George. I think he went backwards and then down directly. At that moment, over there on Moss Avenue, a car would be heading which way, Harry?
It would be heading
east.
towards the east. Yeah.
East, right? He had to stop at a stop sign, and then he was going to turn right. Well, when he did, the headlights shone upon a body of a man right in front of him. And at that moment, up in an apartment where Dr. Sutton, don't know if he owned it or not, but
in the Green Hut Mansion.
And he had 2 Bradley students that he rented to, Bob and Bill. That's so simple. They looked out the window, and those lights, when it lit up the body of George McNear, they immediately took off running down the steps and ran right out to him. Well, Dr. Sutton reached the body, who was really lying on its stomach, and he turned him over and he said, "Oh my God, it's George McNear." And that was the beginning, while the car, his name was Carl DeWeith, something like that. He drove all the way down to the city hall and talked to the sergeant and told him what he'd seen. And of course that started the investigation into this massive unsolved murder that lasted to this very day. And after the morning came, that's when all the police came and the photographs were taken, and the whole world heard about it.
Norm, this all started, I mean, nobody really knows why George was killed. We have ideas, but nobody's been able to prove it. But the most obvious reason was they were on strike not about a year before, and there was some violence and some people.
Absolutely.
2 people were killed.
Yeah.
And tell us about that. It happened in Gridley, Illinois, which is in McLean County.
It started in East Peoria when Pants, a man named Irwin Pants Pashan, and Arthur Brown, and a couple other guys, union people. Pants worked for Mr. McNear, and he really liked Pants. That's the nickname they called him. And the union then offered Pants a job, and he took it as a treasurer. And I'm telling you, this hurt McNear, seriously. And for the first time, I think I began to kind of like McNear, because he really did feel for this guy. And now he's on the other side. And when the strike began, it was cold, and they would put wood in barrels, and started in East Peoria. And then when the train came, they would harass and call the people names, scabs, you name everything, and they actually beat one of the scabs up. So they weren't all that innocent either. And then they went to the next place, you would know better than me, El Paso, Eureka, and then Gridley. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they would fight at every one of these places, and it was just good nature, screaming and yelling at each other. And well, when they got to Gridley, they got out all of Pants' people, all Pashan's people, because he was the boss, and walked right on the track as this train was backing up. Well, suddenly this armed flat car, there were 14 men in there with weapons. So there's no doubt in my mind personally who started this, but we did have guns on our side. That's what's his name said, Pashan said. But nothing like what they had. What makes the difference, right? They had guns. And then when the firing started, Pashan was hit. And he said, "Oh, guys, I'm hit." And they stopped and tried to pick him up. And the shotguns and the rifles continued to fire. And that's when Arthur Brown was hit. So now both these men are dead at the scene. And of course, the police came, sheriffs, and this is massive newspaper coverage. And of course, they all blamed McNear. You can see it in the quotes in the paper, because all he had to do was pay him a living salary. That's all they really wanted. That's what they claimed. Then the union said, "Hey, this is standard stuff, Mr. McNear." And he said, "Yeah, well, those other owners are spineless. I'm not going to take this feather bedding." And he went to Congress and spoke even about this later on after this. And after this shooting, a judge stopped the union from picketing. And so when George got his railroad back from the Army, and then he won this federal case, and he wasn't indicted or involved in the trial. Hey, he was sailing good. I'm telling you, in 1947, things really looked good for George McNear.
Norm, there was a trial.
That's right.
And there was 4 guys, and they were all U.S. Army veterans from the World War II. And they were hired by McNear to be strike breakers and also guards to, to keep the Union guys away.
And they did it with guns, Harry.
Yeah, they did.
They did.
They knew how to use them. They were veterans. Yeah.
Now you're on the point why he hired them, particularly.
They went after it all settled down. The police came and the sheriff and everybody, and there were some arrests made and all this. What happened at the trial?
At the trial, of course, we hear everything that I just told you in bloody detail. And of course, the Union versus the non-Union people. And there were no really other witnesses other than, and Pence is dead, and so is Brown dead. And so it was really, you did it, no, I did it, no, I didn't do it. And it was back and forth, and the jury just absolutely could not possibly make up their mind. It was controversial, and a lot of people in Peoria, Illinois, and these are quoted in the newspaper, felt that Mr. McNear should have been indicted as the instigator, and that didn't come about at all. And he got out of it scot-free, and once the trial was over and the healing process, the federal government ruled against the picketers, and so they couldn't picket anymore. And so when George started up his railroad again, you can see the resentment, the hate. And of course it all came from the Union. So all of us then assumed a motive for killing him was within the Union itself.
A lot of tragedy in the family. Their son was a very bright family, very intelligent.
Absolutely.
And one son was a lieutenant fighter pilot in the Pacific, and was shot down in the Pacific and died.
He was in the Navy, actually.
Yeah, he was in the Navy. Yeah.
And did we had another son die here in a plane crash
in 1954? You actually saw that crash.
I hate to even think about it. Don't ever go to one of those, Harry.
Well, in conclusion, Norm, there was they tried to find out. I mean, this stack of information in the investigation just by the Peoria Police Department was rather extensive. I'm sure the FBI was involved in it because it was a railroad.
Absolutely,
and,
they were here.
There was probably a lot of other people involved in it. But in conclusion, what happened? They offered a reward, though, right?
It got up as high as $52,000, which was a fortune.
That'd be like $500,000 today.
Now, I want you to think, you're going to tell me that if some Union guy had some idea who did it, you think after they have $52,000, you think he'd be quiet? I don't think so. I would have squealed my brains out. I would have told you everything I know. I'm telling you guys that nobody knew anything. And I'm telling you that when we say it's the Union, it's easy to say that because there's so many of them. But when you really zero in on, well, who did this, the answer is nobody knows. And I am telling you that this came from some wealthy man who really hated George and made the phone calls and set this thing up. That's my view. We'll never know. And I tell you, it was a tough time. Yeah. It really was.
Well, Norm, thanks again for talking about a great Peoria mystery. We'll be doing others later on, but the Bernie Sheldon and the George P. McNear murders, of course, are both cold cases that have not been solved.
That's right.
But it's been interesting going back in history.
Thank you.
And back to the city where you were born and raised and I was born and raised. It was once a wonderful metropolis. It's just a shadow of what it used to be, but it's still home.
It's home.
It's still home.
Hi, I'm Dave Barth with your Sportsman's Tip of the Week. We've talked in the past about concealed carry handguns and self-defense handguns, but we have not talked about shotguns. A shotgun for home or for backpacking is hard to beat. you just can't hardly miss. If you're in bear country, a shotgun loaded with buckshot or slugs or something like that would be just a really good self-defense gun to have. We have a few examples of shotguns that would make a good choice for home defense. The first one here is a Mossberg. It has a collapsible stock. It's a 5-shot, 2 3/4 or 3-inch. It has a shell holder on the buttstock, and it's a pump shotgun. Pistol grip, pump shotgun. The next one in line is a Stevens. It has ghost ring sights, pistol grip, and it's also a pump. Shoots 2 3/4 or 3-inch. It's a 5-shot magazine. If you want a semi-automatic, there's many choices. This is a Benelli. It's a 12-gauge 3-inch with a Picatinny rail and ghost ring sights. And here at the other end, we have a pistol grip shotgun. It's a pump. It's got false muzzle brake here, and it's also a 5-shot, 2 3/4 or 3-inch. The last gun in the line here is a Remington 870 Tactical. It has an 8-shot magazine, a Picatinny rail so you can mount optics on it, open sights, a ghost ring sight, and any of these would be a good choice. One accessory you would really want to put on any of these would be a sling. I'm Dave Barth with your Sportsman's Tip of the Week.
Adventure Sports Outdoors is brought to you in part by Corsall Lumber, manufacturers of quality hardwood products, buyers of standing timber in Smithfield. Central Pool Supply, everything from pools to pool tables and much more in Peoria on West Pioneer Parkway. Kelleher's Irish Pub and Eatery, located on Peoria's riverfront, open 11 a.m. daily. Eastport Marina, one of the only marinas in its class between Chicago and St. Louis, on Mariners Way in East Peoria. Goodwill of Central Illinois, free employment and veteran and youth services made possible because you donate. Lori Feld of Allstate Insurance, conveniently located in Peoria, East Peoria, and Springfield. And by Statewide Fingerprinting, specializing in concealed carry and FOID cards, 400 North 8th Street in Pekin. Our thanks to all of these sponsors.
Hi, Harry Canterbury. We're in Washington, Illinois with some real special people. A very close friend of mine, Art Hunsaker, and one of his co-workers that worked at the TP&W Railroad in East Peoria, Bob Lee. Bob is a special guy. He's got a hobby that a lot of you railroad enthusiasts would love to do. He's got virtually, his whole backyard is virtually a railroad. And it's quite a place. And I've got to ask you, Bob, when did you start doing all this?
Well, about a year after I retired, I'm going to guess it was probably 2006 that I really got started on it. And it's been ongoing every year. There's add to it every year, add something new and try to keep it running. And it just snowballed into what it is now. There's approximately 540 feet of track in with the all together with the 2 loops, inside and an outside loop. But that's about it. It just keeps a guy busy.
Well, I guess. I mean, it is really just a neat thing. When we came here and I walked in the backyard, and I saw all these trains running around, and you got beautiful buildings, and in fact, you even have the yard house that real similar to it that's down in East Peoria. Right. And that is really neat. How many trains do you or cars do you have out here working right now? And then I see you got a lot of tankers over there too.
Yeah, well, those tankers are just sitting there by themselves. There's, I don't know, I think there's maybe 18 on this car, and then the others not quite that many. But I've got about 50 cars altogether and 21 locomotives.
Yeah. And you worked at the TP&W for how many years?
Well, almost 42.
42 years. You went to work there in 1963 and retired in 2006?
When I retired in 2000, February the 1st of 2005. 2005.
Yeah. Okay. And we got another one of your buddies over here, Art Hunsaker. And Art, you went to work there in 1959. And you retired what year?
March of 59 and worked through April of 89. I had 30 years and 1 month, but I wasn't old enough to retire. So I had to work outside the railroad for a few years till I got to be old enough.
Well, you guys are like the Marine Corps. Once a railroader, always a railroader. Is that right?
I don't know.
You guys can't shake it. I mean, look what Bob's done here.
That railroad goes right by my house, and I don't even hear them go by. You know, that's the farthest thing from my mind is railroad. But you called and getting information. I thought the person for me to hook you up with was Bob.
That's
you
right.
could find all about the railroad from Bob.
Yeah. Well, this is a fascinating display of railroading, and right here in the backyard in Washington, Illinois. What a deal! I tell you what, this is a kids and adult kids. These are adult toys, and it's really something to look at. Art went to work there in 1959, and a few years later, they were cleaning out the office there at the yard, and he was going in on second shift. He saw these laying in a garbage can and picked them up and brought them home. And what are those, Art?
Well, they're old train order bulletins. You had to sign for all the bulletins as far as how the railroad operated. And a lot of these are all the old engineers. This goes back to 1942. I've got one from 39, 42, 47, and 45 and 47. And a lot of these old boys, of course, most all of them are dead and gone now, but I worked with about half of them when I hired out. And I'm sure that a lot of these guys could tell you about McNear because most of these guys was alive during the strike.
They were there.
They were there.
Yeah. Now we're going to ask a little bit about it. You guys have always heard about George McNear. You know, it happened in March of 1947, and I'm just asking you guys, was it ever brought up in conversation to any of the older fellows that have been there a long time? Did you ever hear any remarks made about that event? Oh.
Well, not really. When I hired out, they pretty well hushed up about that whole deal. I don't know if anybody was. They were there. The guys still worked there, a few of them, but they never really talked about that much, and I never really asked that about him. You know, yeah. I just know, like you said, it was March of '47 when he was shot and killed, and then shortly after that, they got their union formed up, where that's all they was wanting to do anyway, and he was totally against it, as the way I understand.
Yeah.
So.
Is that pretty much the way that you understand it, Art? That he was not wanting the unions to come in, and
these old boys that were on strike, that were union, you know, they were. I think a lot of them knew a lot more than they talked about. You know, it was just kind of
hush hush.
Hush hush is what it was. They didn't talk about it, but I think a lot of them that were there when I hired out knew a lot more about it than what they were saying. About.
Yeah. Well, nobody will ever know. It's history and it's something in the past, but talking about the past today with this beautiful railroad set up in Bob's backyard, it's unbelievable. Thanks again, Bob, for letting us come in your backyard and showing us this beautiful array of railroad cars and little towns and everything else. I mean, it's really something to see, and I really appreciate the chance to come back here and see it.
Well, you're kind of welcome, and you can come back anytime you'd like, and bring whoever you want. I usually run them on Sunday, and but that's through the week. I'm usually working on them or doing something, but Sunday is the main day to run.
All righty, buddy. Thanks a lot. Hey, thanks for watching another edition of Adventure Sports Outdoors. Norm and I had a good time, and seeing those old trains over here in Washington was quite a thing, wasn't it?
Oh, it was really marvelous, you know.
Hey, you know, when I was a kid, we used to put a penny on those tracks, and then it'd come back later and it'd be smashed.
Harry, when I was a kid, we didn't have any pennies.
Well, you'd spend them, right?
We didn't. You're damn right.
You weren't going to put them on a railroad track.
No way. I was going to go spend it. I could buy something with it, 2 cents.
Well, hey, let's take a mosey down the track and check it out.
Okay.
We'll see you next month.
I've been working on the railroad all the livelong day. I've been working on the railroad just to pass the time away.